Ifani had always seen the world differently. While others dreamed of becoming doctors or lawyers, he dreamed in scenes and stories. Growing up in a small house in Enugu, he would borrow his neighbor's old camera just to capture moments that others ignored. A child playing in the rain, an old woman selling fruit, the laughter of strangers. His mother, Mrs. Neka, never understood it. To her, success meant wearing a suit, working in a bank, and bringing home a steady salary. Every time she saw him editing videos on his cracked old laptop, she would sigh and say, "Ifani, you're wasting your life on nonsense." He tried to explain his passion, but she never listened. She'd tell visitors that her son doesn't want to be useful, that he's chasing empty dreams while others are building real lives. Even his siblings laughed, calling him movie boy whenever he walked past. But Ifani didn't stop. Every night, after everyone slept, he stayed up writing scripts and cutting clips with his small lamp flickering beside him. It wasn't easy. His laptop froze, the battery died often, and he had to save money just to buy data for uploads. Yet every time he watched one of his finished videos, he felt alive. One evening, there was a big family gathering. His mother called everyone to join, but Ifani stayed in his small corner, editing a video for a youth contest. Hours later, she walked in and found him still working. Her face hardened as she shouted, "You skipped the family dinner again? For this useless video thing." He tried to speak, but her voice grew louder. "You're a disgrace to this family." The words hit him like a slap. He sat there silently, tears burning behind his eyes, pretending to keep editing. But deep down his heart broke. He wondered if maybe she was right, maybe he was a failure. Yet something inside him whispered, "Keep going." That night, while everyone slept, he stared at the stars through the window and made himself a quiet promise. One day she'll call my name with pride. After that night, everything changed in the house. Mrs. Neka told neighbors and church members that her son had lost direction. "He just wastes time on that camera," she would say. Her words spread fast, and soon everyone in the neighborhood looked at Ifani with pity or judgment. Even his siblings started to distance themselves, afraid their friends would laugh at them for having a failed brother. Whenever he entered a room, silence followed. Whenever he tried to speak, someone found a way to remind him of how he'd disappointed their mother. The shame became heavy, but Ifani stayed quiet. He smiled through the pain, hiding his hurt behind a calm face. Then one morning, as his mother complained again about how he would never amount to anything, something inside him broke. He packed his small bag, took his old laptop, and quietly walked out. No one stopped him. Not even his mother asked where he was going. As he stood outside the gate, he looked back one last time and whispered, "One day they'll call my name with pride." He boarded a bus to Lagos with barely enough money for the trip. The city felt bigger and colder than he imagined. For the first few nights, he had nowhere to go. A friend from school, Chuka, allowed him to sleep in the corner of his small phone repair shop. The floor was hard, and the nights were noisy, but it was better than going back home defeated. Each day, he searched for small editing or video jobs. Most people ignored him or underpaid him, but he never gave up. At night, he ate instant noodles and used his laptop until the battery died. He often stared at the ceiling, replaying his mother's harsh words in his head. The loneliness hurt, but it also fueled him. He kept telling himself that every sacrifice, every hunger, every tear would someday make sense. Lagos was rough, but he refused to be another dreamer who gave up. He had no comfort, no support, only a promise echoing in his heart. "I'll make them proud, no matter how long it takes." Lagos was nothing like the dream Ifani had imagined. The noise never stopped, the competition was endless, and everyone seemed to be in a hurry to survive. He spent his days carrying his small camera and laptop around, searching for anyone who needed video work. Most times he filmed birthday clips, street performers, or small YouTube skits for people who could barely afford to pay. Some would promise payment and disappear after the shoot. Others mocked his rates, saying, "You think you're in Hollywood?" But Ifani didn't argue. He just smiled and kept working. Money became his biggest battle. Some days he ate only once, a small pack of noodles or a loaf of bread. At night, when he couldn't afford data, he went to a cyber cafe, begged for extra minutes of internet, and uploaded his videos hoping someone out there would notice him. His clothes grew old. His shoes tore, but he refused to stop creating. His passion was all he had left. He tried applying to film studios, hoping for a steady job. Each time, they turned him down. Some said he lacked experience, others said he didn't look professional. Every rejection hurt, but he told himself this was part of the story he'd one day tell. Still, there were nights when the pain was too much. He would sit in the dark corner of the shop where he slept, staring at his camera, wondering if he had made a mistake leaving home. Then one night, after posting a short film about never giving up, he opened his messages and saw a comment from a stranger. It said, "Your short film changed my life. I was about to quit school, but your story gave me hope." Ifani read it over and over again, tears filling his eyes. That simple message hit deeper than any payment ever could. It reminded him why he started. In that moment, he realized his work mattered, even if just to one person. He smiled for the first time in weeks, whispering to himself, "If one life can change because of my story, then I'll keep going." And with that, he turned on his laptop again and started editing. One afternoon, while scrolling through his phone at the cafe, Ifani came across an online youth film competition. It was open to young African creators who told stories of hope and resilience. His heart raced. It felt like a small chance, maybe the one he had been waiting for. He quickly gathered his best short film, one he had shot with borrowed equipment and sleepless nights, and submitted it. He didn't tell anyone. Not his friends, not even Chuka, who let him sleep in his shop. He feared hearing the same mocking words again, "Stop wasting time." So he kept it to himself and went back to work. Days passed, then weeks. He pushed the thought out of his mind and continued making videos for clients, sometimes shooting for hours under the sun, sometimes editing all night. Every project carried a piece of his pain, and his stories began to change. Instead of focusing on sadness, he started creating motivational short films about never giving up, about believing in yourself even when no one else does. Each upload came from a real emotion, from the scars his journey had left behind. Then one evening, while checking his emails at the cafe, he froze. The subject line read, "Congratulations, you've been shortlisted." His hands shook as he opened it. It said he had been selected among the top 10 young African filmmakers for the competition. For a moment, he just stared at the screen, unable to breathe. It felt unreal. The same boy who was once called a disgrace was now being recognized for the very thing he was shamed for. He wanted to shout or tell someone, but he didn't. He simply smiled, closed the email, and whispered, "Thank you, God." That night, he worked harder than ever. He created more films, this time not to prove anyone wrong, but to inspire those who felt forgotten like he once did. Slowly, people began to notice his work. His page grew, his comments section filled with messages of hope. He realized that true success didn't need noise, it just needed purpose. And for the first time in a long while, Ifani felt proud, quietly but deeply proud. One morning, Ifani uploaded a new short film he titled, "The Son They Rejected." It was raw, emotional, and honest. The story of a young man cast aside by his own family who still found the strength to rise. He didn't have fancy cameras or actors, just truth and emotion. When he clicked post, he didn't expect anything special. He left the cafe and went about his day like any other. But by nightfall, something unbelievable began to happen. Notifications started flooding his phone. The video was being shared again and again. Comments poured in, people writing, "This story feels real. I cried watching this. This is my life too." Within days, it had thousands of views and shares across Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Bloggers picked it up, calling it the voice of Africa's new generation. Some even said it was the kind of story that reminded people why they should never give up. For the first time, people weren't laughing at his dream. They were celebrating it. Ifani sat on the same wooden chair in the shop where he once cried, watching his name appear on blogs and YouTube channels. It didn't feel real. He remembered the nights he'd gone hungry, the times he'd been called useless, and now, people were calling him inspiring. He smiled through tears, whispering, "So this is what it feels like to be seen." Across Enugu, in a hair salon, women were chatting about a young filmmaker making waves online. One of them said, "His name is Ifani Okoro. That boy is something else." Mrs. Neka overheard and frowned. The name sounded familiar, but she brushed it off. She had no idea the man the whole internet was praising was her own son. The same boy she once told was a disgrace. Meanwhile, Ifani's inbox was full of messages from young people thanking him for giving them hope. He didn't boast or brag. He just kept working, grateful and humble. Deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning. What started as rejection had turned into recognition. And the story that once broke him was now the one lifting others. Weeks after his viral film, an email arrived that made Ifani's hands tremble. A popular Nigerian film festival had seen the son they rejected and wanted him to premiere his next short film at their annual event. It was the same festival he used to watch clips of on YouTube, dreaming of being there someday. Now his name was printed among the invited filmmakers. For a moment he sat in silence, staring at the screen, whispering, "Is this really me?" He spent sleepless nights preparing his new short film, editing on his old laptop, using borrowed lights, and directing with everything he had learned from struggle. When the day finally came, he wore a simple black shirt and borrowed shoes. The hall was filled with industry people, celebrities, and journalists. When his film ended, there was silence, then a wave of applause that grew louder until the audience stood up. A standing ovation. He could barely breathe as tears filled his eyes. It wasn't just for the film. It was for every night he slept hungry, every insult, every "you'll never make it." Soon media houses began to call him the new voice of African youth. Headlines read, "From street filmmaker to national voice." People wanted interviews, producers reached out for collaborations, and his follower count exploded overnight. His inbox filled with messages from young creatives asking for advice, and he always replied patiently, encouraging them never to give up. He remembered how lonely his journey had been and wanted others to feel seen. Yet even in all the success, he hadn't gone home. Deep down he wasn't ready. Not out of pride, but because he wanted the moment to be right. He wanted to return not with words, but with proof that his dream wasn't foolish. Every night, after long days of filming and meetings, he thought of his mother. He pictured her sitting in that small Enugu living room, still unaware that the son she once dismissed had now become a national name. He whispered to himself before sleeping, "Not yet, but soon. I'll go home soon, when she can finally see me as I am now." One hot afternoon, while Ifani was editing a project in his small apartment, his phone rang. The number looked strange, long digits, no name. He almost ignored it, thinking it was another scam call, but something told him to answer. A calm voice on the other end said, "Good afternoon, Mr. Ifani Okoro. This is the office of the president. You've been selected for a national award recognizing young Nigerians transforming the creative industry." For a moment, he thought it was a joke. He even laughed and said, "Please stop playing." But the caller replied seriously, "Sir, this is official. You'll receive your invitation letter by email." When the email arrived minutes later, complete with a government seal and signature, he just stared at it in disbelief. The president of Nigeria knew his name. The same name that once sounded like failure now carried respect. He sank into his chair, tears in his eyes, whispering, "God, is this real?" The day of the ceremony came. He wore a simple but neat black suit, borrowed again from a friend. The hall was filled with dignitaries, journalists, and cameras. When it was time for the Youth Creativity Award, the announcer paused and said, "This young man's story reminds us that failure is only a phase before greatness." Then the president himself called out, "Ifani Okoro." The entire hall erupted in applause. As Ifani walked to the stage, flashes from cameras lit his path. He shook hands with the president, his heart pounding as the crowd clapped. The president smiled and whispered, "You are the hope of this generation." Those words echoed louder than anything he had ever heard before. Far away in Enugu, in a small living room, Mrs. Neka was watching the event live on TV. At first, she wasn't paying attention, until she heard the president say her son's name. She froze. The camera zoomed in on Ifani's face, holding his award, smiling humbly. The plate read, "National Creative Youth Award, Ifani Okoro." She covered her mouth in shock, her eyes filling with tears. For the first time, she whispered his name softly, not in anger but in awe. Her disgrace had just been honored by the president himself. The quiet street in Enugu suddenly came alive that evening. The award ceremony was being broadcast live on television, and almost everyone in the neighborhood was watching. When the president called out Ifani Okoro, the camera showed a young man standing proudly on stage, holding a golden plaque. The neighbors gasped. One shouted, "Wait, isn't that Madame Necka's son?" Within minutes, people began running toward her house, knocking on the gate, calling out, "Madame Necka, come outside. Your son is on TV. The president just called his name." Mrs. Necka, who had been cooking quietly in the kitchen, froze when she heard the noise. Confused, she wiped her hands and walked to the sitting room where the television was playing. The moment her eyes met the screen, everything around her went silent. There he was, her son, the same boy she once called a disgrace, standing confidently beside the president, smiling as flashes of cameras lit up the stage. She dropped the spoon in her hand, her lips trembling. Slowly, she sat down, staring at the screen in disbelief. Her heart pounded. Tears welled up in her eyes as she watched him raise the award, thanking his mother for being part of his journey. She covered her mouth and began to cry softly. The same woman who had once shouted, "You're a disgrace to this family," was now watching the world clap for the son she doubted. Soon her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Relatives who once mocked her for having a wayward son were now calling to say, "You must be so proud, Madame Necka. Your son has made history." Even her church friends sent messages filled with praise. Everyone suddenly wanted to be associated with the family they once ignored. As more people gathered outside, cheering and celebrating, she sat quietly in the corner of the room, tears streaming down her cheeks. It wasn't just pride, it was regret. She remembered every harsh word, every time she had told him he'd never make it. Now she could see how wrong she'd been. Watching her son's face on that screen, she whispered through tears, "I didn't see your vision, my son. But now, I see your greatness." A few weeks after the award ceremony, Ifani decided it was time to return home. He didn't come in a flashy car or dress like a star, just a clean, modest sedan and simple clothes, carrying himself with quiet confidence. As he drove through the familiar streets of Enugu, memories of the harsh words, the mocking neighbors, and the lonely nights tugged at him, but he kept his head high. Today was not about proving anyone wrong. It was about closure, healing, and finally stepping back into the home he once left with a broken heart. When he arrived, his family had gathered nervously in the living room. His siblings shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to act. His father, usually quiet, looked tense, and neighbors had whispered rumors that he might finally forgive them, or perhaps be angry. Mrs. Necka stood at the doorway, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes full of tears. She had watched her son's success unfold from afar, feeling pride mixed with shame for how she had treated him. As Ifani stepped inside, the room went quiet. He smiled softly at them, not with arrogance, but with warmth. His mother, unable to hold back any longer, rushed forward, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry, my son," she sobbed. "I didn't see what you saw. I didn't understand your dreams, your fight, or your strength." Ifani embraced her gently, feeling the weight of years of pain melt away in that single moment. "You don't need to apologize, Mama," he whispered. "You made me strong. Every word, every doubt, every tear shaped me. And now, I'm standing here because of it." The room filled with quiet emotion. His siblings slowly joined the hug, the tension dissolving into relief and love. Even his father's eyes glistened, a subtle nod of approval acknowledging the man his son had become. That day, laughter and tears mixed freely, and for the first time in years, their home felt whole again. Ifani's return wasn't about showing off his success, it was about forgiveness, love, and closure. The boy once called a disgrace had come back not just as a filmmaker, but as a son who had conquered rejection and returned with a heart full of compassion. It was a moment that would stay with them forever, a story of pain transformed into pride, anger transformed into understanding, and hurt transformed into unconditional love. The conference hall was buzzing with energy as young people from across Nigeria filled every seat. Bright banners hung from the walls and cameras rolled, capturing every moment for live broadcast. At the center of the stage, Ifani stood holding his award, the weight of his journey pressing lightly on his shoulders. He looked out at the crowd, a sea of hopeful faces, and felt a calm confidence he had never known before. The boy who was once called a disgrace was now speaking to the very generation that could change the country. He took a deep breath and smiled, letting his story sink into the room. "Sometimes," he began, his voice steady but full of emotion, "the people who doubt you are the ones you'll later make proud." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of years of struggle, hunger, and rejection. He spoke not only of his achievements but of the pain that shaped him. The sleepless nights in Lagos, the harsh words at home, and the moments he felt invisible. Every eye in the audience was fixed on him, and whispers of awe spread through the crowd. The camera panned to the audience, and there she was, Mrs. Nneka, his mother. Tears streamed down her face as she clapped loudly, pride shining through her remorse. She had watched her son grow from the boy she doubted into a young man who inspired thousands. The applause grew, echoing through the hall, as Ifeanyi paused, letting the moment sink in. His voice softened as he continued, narrating over clips of his journey projected on the big screen. She once called me a disgrace, but today, she calls me her pride. The images showed him working late nights, receiving the presidential award, returning home, and finally hugging his mother. The crowd watched, moved to silence and then cheers, feeling the full weight of his story. As the final words faded, the screen displayed his quote in bold letters. "Don't let rejection define you, let it drive you." The audience rose to their feet, inspired and uplifted, carrying the message that failure is never the end. Ifeanyi stepped down from the stage, smiling, knowing that his story was no longer just his own. It was a spark for anyone who had ever been told they weren't enough. In that moment, his journey came full circle, from disgrace to pride, from rejection to legacy.